The UFC made Aljamain Sterling remove his own rum bottles from the table at Media Day. And somehow, that turned into one of the most talked about moments of the week, because now people are asking the obvious question: how is a former champion, a guy who's been with the company for years, not allowed to quietly promote his own brand, when we've all seen other fighters do exactly that before? And that's just one part of the chaos right now. You've got Arman Tsarukyan firing back at Ilia Topuria and basically telling him to stop talking and sign the contract. You've got respected coaches saying Islam Makhachev could have real problems with Ilia stylistically. You've got Rockhold calling for Khamzat to put Sean Strickland away, and you've even got people joking about Jon Jones eye pokes again, with Jon somehow enjoying it. So yeah, there's a lot going on. Welcome back to the Rear Naked Choke. No fluff, no filler, just straight to the point UFC news. And if you're already locked in, a quick like helps more MMA fans find the channel. Let's start with Aljo, because even though his fight with Youssef Zalal is this weekend, the thing that got people talking first had nothing to do with the fight itself. It was the bottles. Sterling had bottles of Funk Harbor on the table at Media Day, his Jamaican rum brand, and UFC staff told him to take them off. Now on paper, maybe that sounds small, but the reaction tells you why it isn't. A lot of fans immediately sided with Aljo, and honestly, I get it, because from the outside, it looked weird, it looked inconsistent, and in this sport, the second something feels inconsistent, fans go straight to the obvious examples. That's why people instantly started bringing up Conor promoting proper number 12. Because once people have seen one guy do it publicly, then they see another fighter get stopped from doing something similar, it becomes less about policy and more about why him and not him. That's what made the whole thing feel off. And Aljo's own response made it even more interesting, because he said he'd done it before. He mentioned other fight weeks where he'd had the bottles out and nobody said anything. So from his point of view, this wasn't some new thing he was trying to sneak in. That's what made it strange to him. Still, to his credit, he didn't turn it into a full-blown argument. He basically said he didn't want to make things hard for the staff member involved. And that says a lot, because some fighters absolutely would have made a scene out of that. But the bigger reason this story got traction is because it plugs straight into a criticism fans already have of the UFC, that the promotion doesn't always do much to help fighters build themselves outside of the cage. So when a guy like Aljo gets told to put away his own product, people see it as another example of that same problem. Now, the actual fight this weekend is interesting too, because Youssef Zalal is coming in on a serious run and sounds like a guy who knows exactly how big this moment is. He said it himself. It's one of those surreal moments where you stop and realize who's standing across from you. Because for him, this is Aljamain Sterling, a former champion, a known name, a guy who was already established while Zalal was still an amateur, and now their paths have crossed. That's a real moment for any fighter. What I liked about the way Zalal talked about it is that he didn't sound starstruck. He sounded aware, respectful but aware. Like, yes, this is a big name, yes, this is a big opportunity, but I'm here for a reason. He also mentioned that they've trained together before, so there's already some familiarity there. Not in a dramatic way. He said it wasn't anything crazy, just some training, some rounds, some shared time in Vegas. But that still adds something to the fight, because now this isn't two total strangers trying to figure each other out from scratch. There's at least some idea of what the other guy feels like, and that matters. What really stood out, though, was Zalal saying he actually wants to test his grappling and jiu-jitsu in this matchup. That's confidence, because most people facing Aljo would make the fight sound like a problem to survive. Zalal is making it sound like a puzzle he wants to solve. That's a very different mentality. Now, while that fight week is playing out, the lightweight and welterweight conversations are getting more and more chaotic. Let's start with Ilia Topuria and Arman Tsarukyan, because Arman clearly did not appreciate what Ilia had to say. Ilia's basic message was that Arman isn't on his level, that if they ever cross paths, he breaks him early, and that Arman should stop with the side activities and make sure he actually shows up when the time comes. So Arman fired back in exactly the way you'd expect Arman to fire back. He basically said, good luck with all that. If I'm such an easy fight, then sign the contract. And honestly, that's the right response, because that's the real question here. If Ilia really thinks Arman is that beatable, why not take the fight and prove it? Why keep talking about moving around him? Arman's whole angle is simple. If you're that confident, stay where you are and fight me. That's not a bad argument. Then, because Arman can never just leave it at the actual fight talk, he randomly started going after Ilia for shaving his arms and legs, which is just such an Arman thing to do. It's so specific and so childish that it somehow makes the whole exchange funnier. But underneath the weird jokes, the serious point is still there. Arman thinks Ilia is avoiding him, and whether that's true or not, that's clearly how he wants the public to see it. Now add Islam Makhachev into that conversation, and it gets even more interesting because Firas Zahabi gave one of the smarter breakdowns I've heard on why Ilia could actually be a much more annoying fight for Islam than people realize. He said shorter fighters can be harder to take down than taller ones, especially for someone like Islam, because Islam's takedown style tends to attack higher on the legs. That works differently against a shorter, stockier, explosive guy with good wrestling and serious power. And that's where Ilia becomes a real problem. Firas still said he would pick Islam, but that's not really the main takeaway. The main takeaway is that he sees Ilia as one of the more difficult style matchups for Islam, specifically because of how compact and dangerous he is. That matters, because it tells you this isn't just fan hype anymore. When coaches start explaining exactly why the matchup is tricky, the conversation changes. Now it becomes less, could Ilia make it competitive, and more, what happens if Islam can't control the fight the way he normally does? That's why fans keep circling back to that fight. It's not just because both guys are stars, it's because the styles make people curious. Now, speaking of fighters who never struggle to create noise, let's talk Khamzat Chimaev, because Luke Rockhold has been around him in the gym and sounds fully convinced Khamzat is going to handle Sean Strickland, not edge him, not maybe beat him, handle him. Luke said he expects a masterclass, and more importantly, he framed it like the last time there was too much tension around Khamzat because he was chasing the title so hard. Now, in Luke's words, Khamzat can just go be his best. That's interesting, because a calmer Khamzat might actually be more dangerous than the frantic, over-eager version. The version that doesn't feel like it has to force the moment every second is the one you probably don't want to deal with, and Luke very clearly thinks Sean is in trouble if that version shows up. He also, let's be honest, made it pretty clear he is not exactly a Sean Strickland fan, so some of that is personal. But even through the insults, the point was obvious. He sees Khamzat as the much more talented fighter. Now, while everybody else is talking about future super fights and title implications, Henry Cejudo is over here explaining why he had to pull out of his wrestling match with Merab, and he still didn't want to say exactly what the injury was, which usually means it's something he thinks might hang around for a bit. He described it in a way every athlete understands. That feeling where something is just off enough that if you push a little harder, it doesn't feel like pain, it feels like something is going to go. That's usually when smart athletes back off, and Henry made it sound like that's exactly where he was. He didn't want to turn a manageable issue into a blown-out injury, which is the right call, even if fans hate hearing it. The thing with Henry is people are always going to joke about age, father time, all that stuff. But injuries don't care how competitive you are. If something's unstable, it's unstable. Now back to Jon Jones for a second, because one of the funnier moments this week was him responding to that ridiculous Tupoke edit making fun of his eye poke history. Rampage Jackson was laughing at it on stream, calling it diabolical, but also telling people to stop disrespecting the best fighter in MMA history. And Jon, being Jon, reposted it and basically said, yeah, tell them to put respect on my name. That's such a Jon Jones response. He can laugh at the joke, but only if there's still a reminder in there that he sees himself as the greatest, and honestly, that self-belief is probably a big reason he has been what he's been for so long. Then we got another Jon moment while filming that Aleph reality show where Daniel Cormier was talking about wrestling Jon in basically any style possible and didn't even realize Jon was standing right behind him. That's just one of those accidental perfect clips because it's DC and Jon. Even years later, those two can create awkward entertainment without even trying. Now, let's switch over to Dustin Poirier, because Dustin gave a pretty honest read on why he thinks Conor McGregor keeps circling back to the UFC. He said Conor is a real fighter, sure, but he's also addicted to the limelight, and that feels dead on. Not just the fight itself, the attention, the headlines, the noise, the card placement, the feeling that everything is orbiting around him again. That's what Dustin seems to think Conor misses most. And honestly, that makes a lot of sense, because with Conor, the whole event has always been bigger than just the fight. The build-up is part of who he is. The attention is part of who he is. So when rumors start building again, it doesn't just feel like, is he ready to compete? It feels like, does he want to be the center of the sport again? And Dustin's answer seems to be yes. Now, before we wrap this up, there's one last thing worth touching on. Alex Pereira at heavyweight, because every new clip of him right now looks scary. He's hitting pads with Glover, he looks huge, and whatever doubts people had about whether he'd look undersized at heavyweight are disappearing quickly. He does not look like a guy who wandered too far from middleweight. He looks like a genuine heavyweight, and once people fully accept that, the conversation changes. Because then it's not, can Alex carry his power up? it becomes how many heavyweights actually want to stand there and find out, and that is a much different question and a much scarier one. So right now you've got Aljo dealing with weird media day drama right before a very real test against Zalal, Arman and Ilia jawing at each other, with Islam sitting right in the middle of that whole conversation. Zahabi making people think harder about the Topuria Makhachev matchup, Rockhold backing Khamzat hard against Strickland, Henry dealing with injury issues, Jon Jones somehow getting memed and praised at the same time, Dustin breaking down Conor's mindset, and Alex Pereira looking like an actual problem at heavyweight. That's a loaded stretch of news. Let me know in the comments what stands out most to you. Would you rather see Ilia against Islam or Arman against Ilia first? And do you think Zalal has a real shot this weekend against Aljo? And if you want more straight to the point MMA news, make sure you subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one.